What you call that noise?
The XTC Podcast.
What do you call that noise?
Pop filters at the ready, because this is a podcast about power pop. Apologies right from the start for the pandemic of plosives in the next hour. I'm Mark Fisher, and this is What Do You Call That Noise? The XTC Podcast. Today, we're going to be hearing from Brian Vander Ark of the Verve Pipe about his love of XTC, and from Paul Myers about his love of power pop, and just possibly his love of XTC as well. I'm thrilled to have them both with us today. But first, to whet our appetite, here's Julie Matthews, who's been rooting around behind the bar and riffling through the jukebox to match the perfect drink with the perfect song.
What do you call that noise?
My name is Julie Matthews, and I recommend pairing the wheel and the maypole with a vodka and orange. You get two songs in one, so why not join them with a screwdriver?
Thank you, Julie. That sounds irresistible. Quick thank you to the fabulous supporters on Patreon who make this podcast possible. They include Pink Things, Humble Daisies, and Knights in Shining Karma. And the Knights in Shining Karma will get a name check at the end of this episode. I'll just highlight one in particular. Jesper Kumberg is one of the newest Knights in Shining Karma, and he's been known to help Malin Kumberg run Adala Gard, which is a craft dairy, food crafts and farm shop on a 17th century farm in Billinga in Sweden. If you check out the website at aldegard.se, you'll see it looks absolutely gorgeous and mighty tempting to order the honey, dried mushrooms and flavored salt in the online shop. If you'd like to become a Knight in Shining Karma, please head to patreon.com/Mark Fisher. With me today is Melanie, who is in California, and she is at the center of a Venn diagram featuring, you've got one circle with XTC fans, one circle with power pop fans, and another circle with people who are planning to launch a podcast. How are you doing, Melanie?
Doing well, thank you. Really happy to be here.
Great. Well, it's lovely to have you, and we'll be talking again in a minute, and you can find Melanie on Twitter at mixtape64, mix_tape64. And I'll come back to you in a minute, Melanie, to quiz you about your love of power pop after I've given a big welcome to Brian Vander Ark. Good to see you, Brian.
Nice to be here, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming on the XTC podcast. And to Paul Myers. Welcome, Paul.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And the reason we've come together is a new book called Go Further, More Literary Appreciations of Power Pop. Paul is the co-editor and Brian is a contributor. So we'll be talking primarily about that. XTC fans will know the Verve Pipe for their big, raw and robust cover of Wake Up on the Testimonial Dinner tribute album from 1995.
You put the cleaners to the shoot and then you stagger down to meet the dawn. You take a ride up on the bus, it's just a bunch, you know it keeps you born.
Brian also collaborated with Andy Partridge on the song Blow You Away, which appears on the soundtrack album of music from and inspired by The Avengers. And that was the 1998 remake of the 1960s British spy series rather than the Marvel franchise.
Why don't you blow, them all away and start again.
And I have to be grateful to Brian here because at some point in the past 20 years, I'd forgotten why I had a soundtrack album to a film I'd never seen. And now I've remembered it's because Blow You Away is the reason. So it's good to be.
I'm not sure anybody actually saw that movie.
Yeah, I was probably one of the many people who didn't see that film. The Verve Pipe had a big hit in the US with the Freshmen right at the start of their career and also had success with Photograph and Colourful. Then moving on to Paul. Paul is a songwriter, journalist, and author. He is the host of the Record Store Day podcast and the author of books about Kids in the Hall, Todd Rundgren, Bare Naked Ladies, and Long John Baldry and the Birth of British Blues. He is the co-editor of Go All the Way, a literary appreciation of power pop, which is the first in this maybe franchise, I don't know, which featured chapters on Blondie, Big Star, Cheap Trick, XTC, ELO, and many, many more. And so now he's the co-editor of Go Further, More Literary Appreciations of Power Pop, which has chapters as well as the one we're talking about. There's stuff about the Ramones and the Archies, actually, and Squeeze, the Replacements, and all your faves. Maybe actually it'll be right to start with Paul, because I think one of the big questions that many people would have is in fact, we've already had a bit of a debate online about the definition of power pop. I was trying to argue that Blondie was my idea of power pop, and you were saying no, Blondie are at the far edge of a definition of power pop. Where do you have a neat, succinct definition?
Well, I will say at first, S.W. Lawden is my co-editor. I should mention him because, and a little bit about how the book happened is I was asked to contribute to a previous anthology by Rare Bird Books about progressive rock. And I wrote a piece about having grown up at that tenuous time when I was listening to prog rock, but then new wave, so-called new wave and punk came out. And that moment where you started to get interested in bands that had a little bit of the progressiveness and blah, blah, blah. And then XTC magazine, Susie and the Banshees, and all those bands came along, Talking Heads, and Bill Nelson was doing XTC-ish stuff. And it was like very interesting time. And Eno and Fripp and Bowie had gotten really kind of Berlin. And so for me, that kind of got me interested in this idea. And then I remember saying to the editors, we should do one of these about power pop because, and now I'm going to answer your question, because it's one of those terms that a lot of bands run away from because it used to, frankly, ghettoize them commercially. People would say, oh, great, the Skinny Tie crowd will buy it. No one else will, And then I remember Fountains of Wayne and Marshall Crenshaw used to talk about Don't Call Me Power Pop. And I thought, well, let's talk about what it is, but also let's talk about kind of what it isn't. But let's just talk about, much like love is what I said, much like the definition of love, you find a million different answers, and also the definition of art. A lot of times people will say, what is art? And then, does art always have to have an engagement factor? Does art always have to be socially conscious? Power pop, to me, the commonalities are, and this is going by, it's an exciting beat. It's kind of a celebration of almost a post-adolescent moment. At its best, it's Friday night, and you just got paid, and you're missing somebody, and you're going to go see them, and it's exciting. It's eternally Friday night in these songs to me. And there's a jangly quality to the guitars, but there's also crunchy guitars. It's often guitars. We're starting to get new definitions every day about non-guitar power pop, and there's often massive harmonies. And I think that to me, the massive harmonies are what really puts the pop in the power pop. And so you had like the Raspberries, you had XTC at their best, you had the records, and then that's where bands like Blondie come in because they have a massive harmony thing and that urgency. So and again, it is kind of one of those things where we don't expect anyone to come away knowing definitively what it is, but we try to color the broad spectrum of it by showing you different people's reactions in a kind of literary, non-journalistic way. Did I explain it? I hope.
It is. Yes, I think you're perfectly. And if it looks like power pop, if it tastes like power pop, if it smells like power pop, it probably is power pop. I think that's as close a definition.
Yeah. What do you call that noise? I mean, that's the eternal question, right?
Yeah.
What do you call that noise? Well, I call it pop. So.
Melanie, on your Twitter profile, power pop is the first thing that you mention. Do you have an any more succinct definition than Paul came up with?
No, Paul's definition was so fantastic. I don't think I can add to it, but I did want to say, for me personally, power pop really resonates with my DNA. That's the only way I can describe it. It gets into your DNA. It hooks you in with the chiming guitars, ringing guitars, which I love, and crunchy. As Paul said, the melodies, the hooks, the harmonies, it just gets you, or at least it does for me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Brian, if I didn't know better, if I listened to the Verve Pipe, I would say rock before I said power pop. Is that unfair?
That's not unfair at all. And that's exactly right. In fact, that, the biggest album, the one that we sold with the Freshmen on it, had very little harmony on it, much to my disappointment. But, these things that you're influenced by when you're growing up, sometimes don't translate the way that, you think they should. And you have to hold back on these things. And as much as I tried to write power pop, I realized that I was a much better listener and I could enjoy it,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And in the book, you've just used the same word again. That word harmony comes up. Harmony then is crucial to your definition of power pop.
Well, it definitely is, because I mean, I was introduced to harmony through Lawrence Welk, the Lawrence Welk show. I mean, my folks were, we were very religious, very Christian Reformed family, and we weren't allowed to listen to secular music other than what was on Sunday nights with the Lawrence Welk show, or, I mentioned in the essay, the Ray Conniff Singers, these were all these vanilla versions with massive harmonies on these songs, and I absolutely loved them. I remember dueling banjos, for instance, was dueling vocals or dueling voices, that kind of thing. So that definitely, defines power pop in my book. Also, I think that Paul's right. The energy that you get from that. Now, I was energized by the harmonies always. I mean, take a song, remember Beach Baby? Beach Baby, Beach Baby.
Absolutely.
I mean, that was like, I was blown away by that. I'm listening to that on my little AM radio, you know what I mean, when I was a kid. And hearing that and going, what is this? I was so excited by it, So that to me was power pop,
Mm-hmm. And Brian, if Wikipedia is to be believed, and often it isn't, you and I were born a month apart.
Oh, is that right?
I think that's significant to me anyway, coming from the UK, because it meant that I felt that I was always just a little bit too young for punk, and maybe a little bit too middle class and a little bit too scared of it, but at precisely the right age for XTC, who I discovered in.
I fall into that same. Yep, I'm right there with you. It's exactly right.
Yeah, and XTC bring the harmony, bring the melody, but also enough of the angularness and the guitars and the angst that also I would have been looking out for at whatever age I was then, 15, 16.
Right. Same for me. Absolutely the same for me. But I wasn't introduced until later. I'm a latecomer. I was a latecomer to XTC. I mean, a girlfriend had given me a mixtape with Love on a Farm Boy's Wages on it. And I was like, no, what is this? Which is like way late, And I was like, wow, well, this is great. What is this? And then went back and got to discover everything again. And I'm always envious of those people that are latecomers that get to go back and listen to all that and feel those feelings, and so I was fortunate that it happened to me in that way, I think,
And Paul, if you think about XTC and you think about your definition of power pop, XTC have got so many styles and so many different influences. Is there a sort of classic power pop era for the band? Do you think it's all power pop? Is some of it power pop?
I'm trying to try not to do long-winded answers on everything, but I'm a journalist, so I tend to do this. But I will say this: the first thing you should know, though, is that in all artists, I've decided that power pop is a stylistic part of the whole. So there are very few. There are a lot of bands that are strictly power pop, but I personally, as an artist myself, I don't like to limit. I think it's a palette thing. I think like I could write a rockabilly song, I could write a punk rock song, I could write a heavy metal song. And when I choose power pop, I have a certain colors that I use. And given XTC, to answer your question, I would say, Are You Receiving Me was the beginning of a sense that they were trying to channel the 60s Hollies, Kinks stuff, and Beatles, obviously, but more like the Hollies, Who, and Kinks into what was the landscape of their times, basically trying really hard to pull harmony back in, much like the Buzzcocks did. And so contextually, it's important to know that the landscape they were in. So I'd say go to, and then certainly This Is Pop is a manifesto of that from the first era. But then also, I mean, later on, when they started like letting their Duke's flag fly, they felt sufficiently comfortable to jangle themselves into things like Earn Enough for Us on Skylarking, which to me is an archetypal kind of power pop song. And if I really think about it, probably No Thugs in Our House is kind of a power pop. It's more of like the Who does power pop. I mean, the Who were one of the first power pop bands. So again, we don't strictly say that any band is a power pop band generally, except maybe even the Raspberries were not 100% power pop, and Big Star journeyed into it. But anyway, so there's the shortest answer I can think of right now.
Great, yeah, it's really good, interesting. And Melanie, do you have? It's the same question for you, really. Where does your liking for power pop and liking for XTC fit together? Is it one and the same?
Well, I can see how they could be classified as fitting into the power pop genre, but to me, they're just so much more because of the genius, the musicianship, the brilliance, the arrangements, the sheer magnitude of what they do. So I could see them classified as power pop, and I get those power pop feelings with some of the work. Like Paul said, "Earn Enough for Us" was actually in my mind as well as classic there, but they're in a whole other stratosphere for me. Oops, pun intended. Because of just the brilliance of the musicianship. So I would say yes, power pop, but to the 1000th degree, if that makes any sense.
And it does. And Paul, the fact that you've got a second volume of essays about power pop suggests, actually confirms that the way this conversation is going, which is that it is a big pool and it can be defined in many ways. Did it feel like a second volume was necessary?
It really did. We actually, this is the second time we have XTC. In volume 1, we had David Yaffe's excellent, I'm maybe pronouncing his name wrong, David Yaffe's Agony, The Agony and the XTC, which had originally been published somewhere else. And I personally flagged it and said, we got to bring this in for volume 1. And I kind of held off writing about XTC because I felt like, I don't know why, I just felt too close to it. And I felt like it was kind of like, I think I had just done a lot of XTC writing before that. And then we have Brian's piece, which is excellent also. It's a different angle. And now I've forgotten your question. What was your question?
Oh, just the necessity for a second book because there's so many.
Yes. Well, and that is what I meant by Brian's thing, is a whole different take on that. And there were bands that weren't mentioned in the first book. And there was also writers who started coming to us when they saw that this book was happening. And there's a certain, I'm holding a list in front of me. That's why I'm talking away from my mic. Like Will Birch writes about the records. Now that's a guy, Will Birch is an authority on pub rock and other things, as and it is a member of these bands. And so for him to say, I have a piece on that. Well, yeah, if we have a second book, we're going to put him in. And then there's like Ira Robbins, who was one of the first writers about power pop with Trouser Press magazine. I just went, hey, we should get him, And so then one of the first fanzines was Yellow Pills, which is Jordan Oakes. And so he actually said to me, you should have called me. And I was like, you're right. I guess I didn't think of a lot of people in the first round. So then we started sort of feeling out between me and Steve, S.W. Lawden, that is. And we would we found people, and that's how we found Brian, So it's like, just because the net got cast out a little bit. And then we had to do it kind of on our own rather than open call, because it would be kind of a nightmare. We do tend to curate these things. So anyone who's in here has been discussed and vetted before they've even been asked. Or if they come up with something that we think, oh, I guess they're not a writer, they had all the good intentions, but we really wanted the literary part of this to work. So it is, he could go on to a third one. Michael Chabon, the novelist, wrote about Big Star in the first one. So we could go wide on this thing,
And I'm just thinking, Brian, from your point of view, it's a very, well, Paul's just used the word literary. It's a very beautifully written piece, but it's also very personal and true, and Paul was saying that he obviously could have written about XTC himself, but it feels like it's somehow too precious to people sometimes. I'm not saying XTC especially in this, but if it's your favorite band or one of your favorite bands, it's a bit like going naked in public. Did you hesitate before writing it? Was it a tricky thing to write?
I did it without any hesitation. I still think about that time that I spent with Andy and how important that was to me. As a songwriter, and at where our band was at that time, we had just, we knocked U2 off the #1 spot, so you're like, I mean, this is a dream world for a kid from Grand Rapids, Michigan, especially one that didn't listen to secular music growing up, or wasn't allowed to. So to be able to be in a position where I might be able to write with one of my idols. I mean, he would be my top 3 people to go and meet with, and to sit 3 feet away, with a microphone in between us, and to listen to him play and sing nonsense lyrics, stream of consciousness, to see what comes out and what fits. And I'm like, oh my God, I do the same thing. Mm-hmm. He does it on a whole different level, believe me. But to have that experience, I was so excited by it. But also, it was, besides the fact that that experience was very humbling just to be there,
Right.
to recall those memories is very humbling as well, because you walk away now in hindsight and I go, you know what? I was never able to capitalize in any way, in any commercial way with that. We wrote a song that I love, I felt great about, and I still had such a hard time getting my band on board with the harmonies and doing the things that we love to do. Adam Schlesinger, I don't mean to go too long either, but Adam Schlesinger, who unfortunately passed of COVID
Mhm.
on April 1st last year, he produced our album called Underneath, which was 3 or 4 years later. And finally, we got to add the harmonies and stuff, and there was no
Yeah.
resistance. In fact, he supported it, and he got in there and, said, try this and try this and try this. So, and unfortunately, that was the album that was released, a week after 9/11. So there was no promoting it. And it was like, oh, well, that's, so I've already been through kind of that ringer. So for me to like recall these things and to write about it, I jumped at the chance, very cathartic too. I mean, loved being able to write about this.
I just want to say to Brian two things about I am super jealous of. But I knew Adam, and I know Andy, but I've never worked with either of them. And to me, that is my hats off to you just as a life experience. And secondly, I just want to say when I first moved to the United States from Canada, from Toronto, and I was driving to visit. My brother was living in Southern California at the time, and we were driving down Highway 1. And that's the first time I heard the Freshmen on the radio. And I remember saying, oh, so that's what's happening in America. It was like one of those things where I guess the song hadn't broken in Canada yet or something, or maybe it had just come out that
That could
week.
be, yeah.
And I was like taking note of the band name because in those days you'd have to wait for it to end. I couldn't
Right.
just Shazam it.
Yeah.
This is the 90s.
That sounds like
so, yeah.
a scene from a film.
Yeah,
The
It also sounds
autobiography of Paul Myers. That's what's happening in America.
Yeah, he was like, sign that kid. No, but anyway, I just want to say that I always said that if I ever met you, I would tell you that because it was just outside of Santa Barbara on the highway. So I just remember, yeah, it was just anyway. That's all.
Is there any better way to hear that song? I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
that's perfect. That's the perfect way.
Yeah, it's true.
You know.
That's absolutely true.
But it's so funny because our music was so lacking of the harmonies and that kind of thing. But we were, the song, The Freshmen in particular, for us was about the only thing that was on, top 40 or modern rock charts then that had a linear story to it. Had this happened and this happened and this happened and these people did this and this and this, and we were fortunate that it did resonate with a lot of people because of that, so.
Excellent.
And the collaboration with Andy came about through your record label, is that right?
Came through, I believe it was EMI Publishing. And I hadn't known, up to that point, I didn't know that, that they were working on a new record. And so immediately I thought, oh my God, I'm going to go right because they're looking for a single and we've got a single on the charts,
Yeah,
This is
exactly.
spectacular. Now, I'm sure Andy didn't think that, or whether he did or not, I mean, I'm very highly doubtful, but the fact that they wanted me to go over there and write with him, they knew I was a fan. He had come and visit us in the studio, like I said in the essay, to watch us record a little bit with Jerry Harrison. So very flattered to be able to do it. But the experience itself, I mean, I've had nothing since then as compared to that. I mean, other people's minds maybe, but not to me. That was the ultimate,
Are you normally a collaborative writer?
I'm not. It's funny. I'm just not. And I've collaborated just a handful of times. Our band was a pretty collaborative band, but nothing like. No, I wasn't the guy that they would go to say, go sit in a room and write something with someone. And I that's just not me. I wouldn't want to do that unless it's Andy Partridge,
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
it's interesting his own career because until the demise of XTC, he didn't collaborate with anybody or very much. I mean, he produced people and did one or two things, but not in the way that he's done it post XTC as a sort of songwriter for hire. And I'm fascinated to know about how that process operates. And did you just sort of throw yourself into his shed and see what happened?
Had to. That's all you do. I mean, all you do is you show up, he's got a cup of tea for you, and you talk a little bit, and you chit-chat about what you're doing and what he's doing, and then he says, well, let's go out in the shed. And you go out in the shed, and, and then you sit down, and you take in the whole thing, and you tell yourself, remember this. Don't live in this moment, don't, forget about any of this, and try to memorize as much as I could. And then to actually then have to play and have to do stream of conscious lyrics myself, to try to see what the melody is going to be, and what syllables are going to work with what we're doing. And, that kind of thing was very, I mean, as you can imagine, was very intimidating, but what an absolute pleasure. I mean, there's, like I said, there's nothing to compare it to.
And is there an ego thing as well? Because the two people who can do the job but aren't used to working with each other and have got to sort of negotiate that relationship with each other and not be offended, but still feel creative and all the rest of it.
Well, I don't think there was any. I mean, I had a tremendous ego back then because of the status of the band. But when you go there with your, I guess, not your tail between your legs. I mean, Paul would know a better way to put it. The fact that you're there with open arms and going, please, master, teach me something. I mean, that's the way you show up to the top of the mountain. You know what I mean? You don't go to the top of the mountain and go, hey, it's cool.
Touching the hem of his garment.
Yeah, it's exactly right. You don't reach that top of the mountain and go, hey, it's pretty cool up here. I'm just going to knock you off. It's like one of these things where I just wanted to learn from him. And also there's so much history with him, and you hear all of the stories. You hear the Todd Rundgren recordings and this kind of thing. And it's funny, Paul, because after I read your book, yours was the only, the section on XTC and Rundgren was the only time that I'd read such an optimistic view of how Todd Rundgren felt. Everything that I'd read had come from XTC.
I was optimistic too, but yeah, Todd definitely was a huge fan.
Yeah, I didn't get that from any times I read something about XTC's, experience, when they talked about it. Maybe I was just reading the wrong books. But so I thought I was going to deal with this, a little bit not angry, but, very strict disciplinarian type of man. I didn't know I was going to deal with a guy who was really amiable and wonderful and funny and charming. And
And as Andy has pointed out every time I've mentioned it too, like Todd wasn't friendly towards Andy. And I have a lot of respect for Todd as a producer, but I know that his bedside manner can be at best brusque, especially then. And so he did not. He had his agenda, and Andy came in with open heart and did his thing. But they just oil and water. The sarcasm didn't sit well with Andy. And I know Andy listened, so I'm trying to tell it in the most like the way that I know that Andy told it, because he was there, I wasn't. So I mean, Todd earned the reputation of being difficult by being sarcastic, I think. But at the same time, Dave Gregory will tell you, that album is great because it got made. Basically. It could have sounded different, and Andy will be the first to tell you that too. But I think everyone agrees that it was a great record. I mean, I don't know. Some XTC fans might not say it's their favorite album now because it's kind of an obvious album. It's like saying the Pet Sounds is the best Beach Boys record, so everyone's going to go, I like Sunflower better. Or something like Friends is my favorite Beach Boy record because I'm cooler than you. But but I think if I would say Skylarking is an album I can throw on any time of the year.
Same here.
And Paul, when you've dealt with Todd, do you find him acerbic and sarcastic and all of those things?
I did at first, and I just talked to him yesterday. And I will tell you this, Todd, I consider him a friend now, but I know the thing about Todd is he's kind of a scientist, and he's at that point in his career when he was working with XTC, and maybe even in the early 70s, he was kind of a wonder kid, and kind of, people brought Todd in to be the genius, right? Rocket scientist, so to speak, but he's more of a intuitive genius. And he's sloppy. He loves throwing shit together. And at the same time, he has a belief in how to make a record. And he got Badfinger's record made that had Baby Blue on it. When George had abandoned it, George Harrison and Mal Evans and everyone had abandoned that record, Todd was brought in to play cleanup. And I think that he thought, and he did that with Grand Funk Railroads, We're an American Band. He took this thing and made it into something that was, ready for the radio. And so Todd's bedside manner was often like, and I've actually talked to him where I've said things like, so it sounds like you're doing this, have you recently discovered sampling? And he'll go, no, I've actually been doing sampling since the 80s. If you really listen, and I'm like, oh, shoot, did I just embarrass myself? And probably yes. I mean, but I will say this: I love Stephen Wilson's work, and I just interviewed Stephen Wilson, and he was the same. I put my foot in a couple of times, and he was like, I don't know, brusque would be the word for Stephen. He was very polite, but people sometimes can. I can't expect everyone to be friendly to me all the time, like super giving, So I think Todd is, yeah. I could see how Todd would do that, and I say this as a guy who just talked to Todd Rundgren yesterday, and I know that if Todd heard this, he would agree.
And I imagine, Brian, as well, just having worked in the music industry, you've come across all sorts of personalities, and you might have been one of them. Where you were saying, the ego goes to your head as you have a big hit, and maybe I'm casting you in the role of the villain here, but maybe you were difficult to get on with at a certain point. But certainly you will have been coming across other people who were.
Absolutely. I mean, I've come across many people that were very proud of what they're doing at the time and what they've done, even though maybe they haven't done anything. But we're not talking about that type of person. We're talking about someone who is an absolute legend as a songwriter, someone who I would never want to get, Andy, you'd never want to get into a verbal battle with Andy. He's brilliant. I mentioned the bullying the English language, and these kinds of things in the essay. And it's so true. This, it's the Elvis Costello. I feel the same way about these guys who can, who are brilliant with the use of the language and how to twist and turn phrases and these kinds of things to make you think, that go over a lot of people's heads. But these are the guys that I would never want to get into any verbal altercation with. My peers, the guys in my bands in the 90s, I easily get into fights in our often did.
It's a very true portrait that you give of Andy of you, the two of you going for a meal together, and him saying to you, "Just ask me anything you like."
Wonderful.
He's a conversationalist, isn't he?
That's the moment, because sometimes, when you meet, your idols, you're, first of all, you're like, I don't want to say anything stupid, just, ask a few questions, but I don't want to embarrass them, because sometimes you can meet people and you ask them questions and they don't want to talk about themselves. They want to talk about something else. Not to say that Andy just wanted to talk about himself, but I had so many questions and asked so many things that it almost got to the point where I'm sure it was obnoxious, but he was so gracious about the entire thing and wonderful about it. And it was just that was the whole thing was a thrill. I can't say what was more thrilling, have him play guitar and sing nonsense lyrics or actually tell me these great stories, but just loved it.
He's very giving with the fans. When he was running the Twitter account, it was great. And you see all these newbies coming to him and saying, I just discovered XTC. What was going on when you made this record? And he'd write 7 tweets back. And, I thought it was really good. I really enjoyed his interaction with the fans.
Again, I think gracious is the word with the fans. He definitely was. And I followed him on Twitter too and went back and forth and enjoyed that immensely, and was sorry to see him go.
Well, I wanted to say to Brian that I'm so happy that you got to have that experience. And I can only imagine how absolutely surreal and amazing that must have been. I'm just, wow. And that I love the song Blow You Away. Just wanted to mention that. It's fantastic.
Thank you. Well, that was that came from Andy. The original idea came from Andy, and I was able to write the lyrics, and something that was, it became satisfactory to him. And I was like, well, let me go record this with the band and let's see what happens, and we did. And I loved how it came out. Unfortunately, it was in a movie that was in theaters for, I don't even think a day. I think, I'm not even sure one showing made it to the theater. I think they probably stopped the second reel they stopped it. But the fact that I was able to do that and look back and go, well, I'm very proud of the work that I did with Andy, and I haven't done anything like that with anyone since,
And you describe writing the lyrics on the plane on the way home, I think.
So excited.
So what did you have at that point when you came to write the lyrics? Was there any lyric in there? Because it's unusual for Andy to be doing music entirely abstractly.
Right. He had the chorus. And he had the beat and he had the whole thing. It was a bit of a T-Rex thing, and it was terrific and it was energizing. And I immediately could hear the harmonies that I wanted to put on it. And then I just took it and went with he sang kind of the melody in the verses too. And it was easy once I realized what it was to ignore, the idea of conceptually of what the song is to ignore everyone else and you blow them all away and let's start let's start all over again and get new friends and do our own thing and that kind of thing. And the attitude that I had at that point was this could be written for me, about me, and my saying to everyone else, I'm going to start all over again and I'm going to be in a pop band and I'm going to write harmonies and and great, drum beats and everything and make that's my new calling, and it didn't work out that way. But
I'm interested in what you're saying as well about the rest of the Verve Pipe being resistant to some of these things that you were bringing in, because if you were using the same argument about XTC and somebody brought in an idea to them, I think XTC would have gone with it because there was something about them that was pliable, malleable. They would take on folk one day, they would take on jazz another day, they would move the psychedelia another day, and very open to other ideas. Was that less your experience with the Verve?
We were that band before we got signed to RCA and before Villains came out, and it was one of the post grunge type albums with the guitar on the left, a guitar on the right, the drums up the middle and that kind of thing, and then one single vocal. That's where we found success. And I don't think anybody wanted to go in any other direction, And so everybody in the band was a fan of Andy and XTC, everyone. But they just didn't see it for us. Maybe they were smart enough to know that, that wasn't what we were meant to do. We were meant to go on and be an American rock band, and perhaps they were correct. But sometimes you pick the path of least resistance, and that's my fault. I think that I didn't fight and say we need to do this. However, I really love the albums that came out after that. So after much argument, you just go, well, let's just do what we do and the paycheck will come. And then someday I'll get to do what I really want to do, So,
well, I don't know if you know, but Andy is planning to release for the first time a lot of the collaborative songs that he's done with people over the years, and he's going to call it "My Failed Songwriting Career."
Oh, great! I'm so thrilled to be a part of that. Wonderful.
Because none of these, with one or two exceptions, none of them have been as successful as they deserve to be. So he's.
Can he call it the failed marketing of my, of my collaborations? Does he have to say my failed songwriting?
Well, yeah, self-deprecating to the last.
That's exciting though. Those tracks coming out like as a one thing, yeah. Because I always loved it when he did some stuff with Stephen Duffy, that Lilac Time stuff, and I love picking out the XTC parts, like picking out the Andy. Oh, that's clearly the Andy part. I might be wrong actually, because I guess sometimes maybe Brian could speak to this. Did you ever go to him and say like something that you think he would like based on what you like about him? Like, do you ever like come up with an XTC part to give him, to try him out and say, you like this? It sounds like you. Like, I don't like.
I tried that when we were seated there. I tried to do that, and the honesty that came from him was palpable, I guess. It was no, I don't like that. I don't like that chord there. I don't know why it was almost like, why are you playing that chord? It doesn't fit. You know better than that. Stop doing that, bad boy, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So,
he doesn't suffer it. He doesn't suffer it when
he does not suffer it
at the issue at hand, because the piece is more important than any personal relationships at that moment.
Absolutely.
Right?
And isn't that really the case? I mean, isn't that why, the best music survives, the piece is above everything,
And I, on a sort of general level, I think that one reason that XTC stayed together as long as they did, I mean, people complain that they didn't last even longer, but they stayed together for a long time, really. And I think it's to do, as human beings, they're very honest with each other and they tell each other like it is. And it clears the air, it gets out, they say it gets out, and then they can just move on to the next thing. They don't sort of sit around harboring grudges.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like that's the same with songwriting, even more so. Just like it's either working or it's not working. Get on with it.
Right. I wish more people could recognize when it's not working.
Mm-hmm.
We could save a lot of time and money in the studio if somebody just said this really isn't working. But a lot of times you have to massage each other's ego, especially when you're collaborating, that wasn't the case here. If anything, anything that any ego massaging that I did to him was not meant to be ego massaging. It was, for my own benefit, to find out again from the master, how do I get to these places faster? How do I get to this? How can I pick up the guitar and immediately know what melody is going to work perfectly with this, until the point where you take it to right to the edge, where you get to the middle eight and you say, I need to take it to a new place. And to do that while playing, and recording in a 6-7 minute session for one song is what these recordings that I still have, to hear that. And it just happens spontaneously. He knows where to go. That's exercising that creative, side of the brain, the right side of the brain. That's, he knows where to go quicker than I know where to go. He doesn't labor over it, which I really recognized. And then I recognized when I listened to the tapes before I, wrote the piece.
And are there fascinating and worthwhile bits of songs or completed songs on the DAT tapes that deserve to be heard? Because you got one song out of it. Are there others in there?
I think there are others. I would have to get back with Andy and say, where were you coming from at this point and this and this? But I've always felt like it's kind of, I guess I've been rather selfish with the whole thing. When I think about it, people always ask me, "Oh, you gotta play me this." I never even played these tape sessions to the band. I mean, I've got 40 minutes or something of, an hour's worth of songs here, and I've never even played it for the band. I guess I've always just kind of kept to myself, And I guess I'm just also now just realizing that how selfish I really am about it.
I would quite happily dedicate an entire podcast just to playing that tape.
Oh, it would never happen.
Definitely.
I have a tape somewhere of Andy. I was recording a phone call I was writing for Crawdaddy Online magazine, and I said that I was fascinated with Mermaid Smiled or something like that, and he wanted to show me the chord on the phone. And he was like, it wasn't a Zoom call, it was just a phone. And I have a recording of him playing the guitar for me that is like I would only show it to some friends, It was just like, this is bizarre, but and I think I have other tapes like this over history, like Todd Rundgren playing me a piano part or something. And it's always amazing. You always think this is my secret recording that you don't almost want to not share it, because it's like, what if people go, that's not very good or whatever, that sounds really hacky or whatever, like, who knows? And you're like, you never invite it. Just keep it to yourself. It's your moment.
Unless you make it your ringtone or something, keep it, keep it to yourself.
I know I talk too much, but I wanted to tell you a story, if you don't mind, about how I first met Andy Partridge. It's convoluted. I was living in Toronto, and I was in a band called what was that band? Oh, Lifetime's 9. And we were going to go to London, and I really wanted to get in touch with Andy Partridge. I knew he was in Swindon, but I was going to go to London and maybe take the train, that whole thing. And I was friends with Mary Margaret O'Hara, and like distantly. And I called her and I said, hey, or I think I saw her somewhere, and I said, you're about to go work with Andy. How do I get in touch? And then her manager said, yeah, here's the phone number. And I put it away. I didn't know how those sessions went. And I think if you're following the XTC story, you know that there was a lot of consternation about what happened with the Miss America album by Mary Margaret O'Hara. But so I get to London. And by the way, I have the same birthday as Andy Partridge, November 11th. So I'm in London on my birthday, and I'm in a pub, and I decide I'm going to call Andy Partridge to wish him happy birthday. I've had a few. I don't drink anymore. In those days, this may be one of the reasons I don't drink anymore. But I called him, and I just can imagine what he thought, like getting a call. Hi, it's Paul from Canada. Anyway. So I said, I'm thinking of coming out to Swindon, and he was like, sure, okay, but give us a call. Like make sure I'm here. That whole thing. And I'm like, okay. And then that week, my friend is a journalist. Was doing something at Virgin Manor. He was interviewing, actually, I remember who it was. It was Heaven 17, which was the offshoot from the original Human League. And we were going to the Virgin Manor, Virgin Records, and I go to the office with him, and I joke, maybe I'll see Andy Partridge. And I go, and I'm sitting in the reception area, and my friend, who's a journalist, says, you're not going to believe this. Andy Partridge just went down that hallway. And I know he's not kidding, because I could tell his voice. So I walk into the offices. I don't know how you could do this now. I walk through, I'm already in the building, so I guess it was easy to do this. And I'm walking and I see him duck into the men's room. And I think, oh, I guess, and like I went in the men's room and I pretended to pee. And I stood there, and then he's finishing, and I'm by the sink, and I say, Andy Partridge, it's Paul. I called you. I'm sorry, I had a few drinks, but happy birthday. I was the guy from Toronto who called you. And he was like, and I just remember, I do a bad Andy Partridge impression because I'm fascinated with that accent, but he said something like, he goes, I'd shake your hand, but obviously they're wet right now. And he said, and then he said, let's get out of here. There's not enough room to swing a cat. And I'd never heard that expression before. So he walks us out to the press area, and he's very excited. I guess this was 84. So, because he gave me This World Over as a single. He went to the press area and gave me a bunch of XTC records and promotional materials. And I guess what I learned later was I think he was in there to talk to them about putting the Dukes of Stratosphere out, because it came out shortly after that. It must have already been planned, but he didn't leak it to me. And then I get home to Toronto, and I'm like, I got all these XTC records given to me by Andy Partridge, and he was great. Like, he sent me on my way. Like, it will never not be the coolest day of my life, like, and to be at the famous Virgin Records Manor, the white building that they used to have that Richard Branson first started. But anyway, so it was really fascinating to me how that happened. And then I've interviewed him several times since, obviously for the Todd Rundgren book, as well as various articles for magazines and stuff. But just fascinating to me that he was so kind and that he just grabbed a bunch of promotional records and gave them to me.
It's brilliant.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah, no, that was
Wow.
Nobody should apologize for telling stories on a podcast. I think it would be a very boring podcast if they didn't. Talking about that era and that album, then Brian, you also did the cover of Wake Up, which you sort of rocked up and you made it your own. Was that an obvious song to choose of all the songs you could have chosen?
I think it was. I think that one for me was one of the first ones that when you listen to it with the headphones on, like I did when I was a teenager and had the beanbag chair and the whole thing, and things were happening, that guitar that was going back and forth, was I was like, oh, I want to do something like this. And then the opportunity came up to actually do a tribute, do a song as a tribute. And we thought, well, let's do that. And we'll do it the way the way our band is now, grunge it up a little bit. But then we also did, we heard I don't know if you guys must know Blue Beret. Remember Blue Beret?
Yes.
Yeah, of course. We did a version of Blue Beret in that same recording session. And that's the one that I really loved. I think overall, out of the two, that's the one that I really wanted to release, but everybody loved Wake Up. And so we went with that. So I have a poster in my room, a testimonial dinner, right here in my studio, right next to me,
And Blue Beret, your version of Blue Beret is still unreleased then?
Oh yeah, Blue Beret. Yeah, no, it's not released. It hasn't been released. It's another one of those things that I hold very precious. When they chose Wake Up, and I loved Wake Up too, but when I lost that battle, I said, I'm going to take my Blue Beret. I'm going to take my Blue Beret and go home. I don't think anybody's heard it since.
And when you get the chance to pick apart anybody else's song, really, you can to cover it. It's a unique opportunity to discover the inner mechanics of a song. Was that the case with Wake Up? That it's a long time ago to remember, but to focus on what was actually going on in the original recording.
I remember I was having a very hard time with the timing of the vocal, and I think if I listen to it now, I'll have to give it a listen, and I'll know that I did it wrong. I came in at the wrong point, and it was stop. No, that's not right. Stop. No, that's not right. My drummer was making him crazy. And I think we ended up, back then it was before Pro Tools. You couldn't just move something, and cut and splice and move it. So I think we ended up just saying, okay, well, he's never going to get it right. Let's just keep it the way it is, And,
Right.
But, for me, it was about the attitude of the song, and I love the lyric, and, so and the opportunity to work at that point, we weren't even signed. So we got on a compilation with They Might Be Giants and, Joe Jackson, of course. I'm such a huge fan of Joe's too. So
what I was thinking of, Brian, this is a two-part question. I'll ask is a sort of before and after. It strikes me that the Verve Pipe, you are your own band. You were you had your own style, and it doesn't you don't sound like an XTC tribute band for sure. So I'm just wondering how you think this band that you were, as you say, all of you were so fond of, how did it influence your music in a kind of attitudinal way, the approach to lyrics, or to for example, I sometimes think, and this is relevant to power pop as well, I sometimes think that the bands that I like are the ones that don't sound like XTC, but they do sound like they've got the same influences as XTC and the same attitude as XTC, which is a sort of power poppy, Beatlesy sort of attitude to noise and to harmony.
But I think for me, it was the lyric, and I think that I'm very aware of the lyric. And I want people to hear us and be aware of the lyric. I mean, our biggest song was a story, and it was all about the lyric. And I know, when you listen to an XTC record, especially when you get past, like when you get into English Settlement and beyond, those lyrics, the lyrics on Skylarking, there's so much attention paid to the lyric. About every single line fits perfectly, and you're taken on this journey, and Oranges and Lemons, the same thing. I mean, just brilliant lyrics. So I think knowing that the lyric is so important to a song, and the story to a song, I think that's what I took and was able to bring to my band. And I think that's where the influence, you can actually hear the influence if you pay attention. Choosing exactly the right word. Each one of these songs is a puzzle piece, is a puzzle, and I'm missing this piece, and I could be missing this piece for a year and finally find that right phrase and that right piece to fit it in. And there's nothing like it when that happens. The sky opens up. It's so glorious. And I can imagine that Andy gets to that puzzle piece sooner than I get to that last puzzle piece, but that feeling is probably the same. So that's what I took away from him, is the importance of the lyric, I think, overall.
And it's also interesting how that emerged in XTC's career, because they started off in that 1977-78 era doing very short, sharp, onomatopoeic, on the cusp of nonsense. It isn't quite nonsense. It does make a sort of sense, but it's very, very brief. And right for the time, right for the songs. So interesting that then that developed through the succeeding albums. Paul looks like he's going to.
No, I'm just nodding in approval. I would say that non-linear is the word I was thinking of for those early, and maybe expressionist in a Talking Heads kind of way, the early stuff. It was much more like, or even post David Bowie, in terms of throwing out seemingly disjointed imagery that creates an overall thing, like a collage rather than a story. And then the linear storytelling, I was just wondering if anyone else has thought about this, but I'm trying to figure out, I think possibly Black Sea has elements of linear storytelling coming in with, like, paper notes. Was it Paper and Iron? Or was it or Tower of London? Like, they suddenly become an actual story. And then English Settlement is very much about.
You mentioned No Thugs in Our House, which is the probably most complete story that they.
Yeah, and I feel like and those Runaways and all the we're talking. That's not Andy, obviously, but and of course, Colin was always bringing the, like Nigel's much more of a straight story than a lot of the XTC at the time. I think at that time, this is my controversial opinion, that Colin, much like George Harrison, had to sort of make his early songs fit with Andy. And then at a certain point, I think, rewarded by the success of the Colin songs, he was allowed to flourish more, until you had a song like Grass that didn't sound like XTC. It didn't sound like Andy's XTC. But I mean, I was really happy that Andy was going in the same direction with him, and of course, Greg's there playing guitar, making everything $1 million. So
Colin can paint a picture with very, very few words, and it's I think it's almost like he doesn't give you quite enough information, so there's always a bit of ambiguity there, but there's enough to. And I happened to be looking back at, I had reason to look back at the lyrics for the album, the first 3 albums. And there's hardly anything of them, Andy and Colin. They're on a page. They just seem to be a few lines, and I'm thinking, but this song is really big in my head. It covers such terrain, and yet they manage somehow in a very few amount of words, and obviously all the music goes around it, but to convey something that seems much bigger to me than would be apparent.
I would say too that if you look back at the early recordings, that's where it fits into the power pop genre. How Paul was describing it with that drum beat and the excitement, and the whole thing was more important than the lyric. The lyric seemed to be rhythmic, and it didn't. You weren't. If you were getting pumped up to go do something and have fun, and you're with your friends and you're drinking, and it's like you're listening to drums and wires and this kind of thing, you wouldn't necessarily need to know what the story of the song was for it to matter in that way. But as you go through the albums, if you look at the album and the order of everything, you see, I wouldn't say growth, because how do you say a band like XTC grew over the years and got better? But I will say you can see where, Cowan's songs were a bit more poppy in the beginning, or a bit more, I hate to say top 40-ish poppy, but I mean, songs that were more accessible to the average person. And then Andy kind of, halfway through started coming around to those types of songs, and then to the end, all the way to Apple Venus, where you go, Jesus, everything on here, brilliant all the way across the board. Lyric, you've got all of the elements that you want sonically, sonically perfection. And I'll tell you this, when I sat and when he played me the demos for that in Swindon, not much had changed from the demos to the actual end of the album.
It's Apple Venus, yeah.
Yeah, Apple Venus, yeah. It was meticulous, and I remember that feeling of this feeling of elation coming over me when Knights and Shining Karma came on, and just the lushness of that. I get chills now just thinking about how I just sunk into that chair and was like, oh my God, what is this song? Who writes this? And for me to be able to be privy to that was just, like I said, indescribable. As you can tell, I'm faltering over my words because it's hard to even.
I'm getting a contact high just hearing it.
Oh, it's just spectacular. Oh,
one of the things I love about XTC, in addition to all the brilliance and everything you've mentioned, is when you brought up Black Sea, Paul. Is there a musical expression for when the music of the song sounds like what the song is about? For example, like Rocket from a Bottle. This is hard for me to articulate, but the music and the song expresses what the song is about. I'm not articulating this very well.
I'm going to let Brian take a crack at it after me, but I just want to say that I feel like you're talking about something that maybe advertising people call synergy, or the idea of symbiosis between a thing. But quite often, a lot of songwriters employ a deliberately non-compatible sound, like a sad melody for a happy lyric, or a happy lyric for a sad melody. But in the case of something like Rocket from a Bottle, this is actually relevant to what we were talking about, my definition of power pop, for instance. I use the word euphoria a lot. And Rocket from a Bottle gets across a kind of, it's like the happy side of angst. It's an anxiety born of anticipatory delight, Boy,
right.
Someone's a writer. Anyway, sorry, but yeah. So but maybe Brian can take on this question.
Well, there's a couple of, I don't know what the term would be. I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about and what works in production to say, well, this song sounds like it should have this, and it's going to work well with the lyric content. A good example, I think, is Seagull Screaming, Kisser, Kisser. That, the first time I heard that, I went, wow, that sounds like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And another one is The Man Who Sailed Around His Soul, the same type of thing. You take that in and you go, well, what's this sound like? And that, when I read the lyric and listen to the lyric, it's exactly what, I would imagine the song should be. So, and I think that has a lot to do, and Paul could probably tell you this too, it has a lot to do with the producer, and the producer being able to take these songs and say, well, let's do this and let's do this and let's do this. And sometimes it's too on the nose. And if it's too on the nose, it'll take the whole song down. So there's a fine line you've got to be on.
It's interesting you mentioned something there, because Sense Is Working Overtime is an interesting song for, it stylistically shifts all the time. And I always thought that the beginning was almost Pictish, like it was like tribal, like, hey, life I stay. And it's very much the Druids rocking. And then all of a sudden the Who arrives. All of a sudden it's Pete Townsend, and all the world is, and you can just see Roger Daltrey swinging a microphone. and then the chorus is like classic jangle rock, and so the pre-chorus is the Who, and it's like I think in a weird way Andy wants you to feel those color shifts, because he's saying we're starting in a primal state, and then we're recognizing the potential of our youth and everything like that. So all the world is football shaped for me to kick in space, and then suddenly the celebratory moment of going, I've got these senses working overtime, and it's widescreen.
That's a brilliant assessment. I'd never thought of that either, but it really is true.
I waited until I was on an XTC podcast to talk about this. I feel like I'm at an AA meeting or something. This is like,
well, in what do you call that noise? The book, David Yazbek talks about burning with optimism's flames and the line reaching to the ground and all around like a Navajo blanket, which with the melody that goes with it is like a blanket that's like the melody itself is reaching to the ground and all around like a Navajo, and it doesn't quite finish, and it's a bit like a sort of thread of a and it's exactly as Melanie says you can't separate the two things. They're interchangeable, and I don't know whether Brian felt that when covering Wake Up, but I think there aren't that many examples of XTC cover versions that break away from the music and the lyrics and the formula that's been laid down, because it's quite difficult to do. The song is all the component parts. It's not just like there's a series of chords with a tune on top of it.
I mean, if you're gonna re-record, let's say you take on, years ago somebody I think who directed the Psycho remake, and did it shot for shot,
Oh yeah.
And you go, okay, well, I can understand doing that, because if I had the opportunity and the money and to be able to go in to re-record, Rubber Soul or something, or I would do it, shot for shot. I'd do the instrument. That's the way that I want to do it. You know what I mean? That's how I would want to redo it. I wouldn't want to redo it in my own way. For me with Wake Up, it was like, well, this is an opportunity to kind of mix the two, kind of bridge that gap between, between what was going on in Britain and Brit pop and, and Collins there, but that and what we were doing at the same time when, the post-grunge thing was happening. So I took advantage of that opportunity. And I can't think of anybody else that really took it so farther than we did. I'm not even sure I don't think Andy and I discussed that either. I'm not even sure how he felt about that, but. Yeah.
Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to do, like some of the XTC songs sort of feel like their era, like Wonderland to me is, you could feel that they're attempting a certain vibe. And I wonder what that song would sound like.
I'm going to jump in before you've got to the end of your sentence, because TC and I, which was Colin and Terry playing live together in Swindon for about 7 or 8 gigs quite recently, a couple of years ago. They did do Wonderland, and there was a fantastic funky bass that came out in the mix. I think it was just a different line that Colin brought out, but it was like there was a different song that was sitting in there. So but I know what you mean, and I sometimes think with XTC it's because they were sort of out of fashion. They were never in fashion, that they sort of transcend fashion over the years, so that you can't quite place. You might hear a Lindrum or something on Big Express, but it's quite difficult to get the exact era, which I think is why a lot of younger people are discovering them even now and not finding them too anachronistic.
That's a fair assessment. Yeah.
I'm wondering, Brian, having had that fantastic experience collaborating with Andy, did the experience affect your songwriting after that? Did it change the way you thought about it?
It taught me to put myself out there, to not be afraid to just go for it, 100%. Like I said, to watch him just come up with a little riff right away and just belt it out. And the energy that was behind that in front of a stranger, a kid, in his presence, to just go out there and do it. They're just songs. You know what I mean? And in the infant state of those songs, they're babies, and you just have to get them out, push them out. And once they're out, guide them into, the adults they become, and I feel that to this day. I mean, I still call upon that time when I spent, that time in the music shed with him, and think of it in that way as well, that you just have to put it out there and see what happens, and then listen to the tape, and then you can go, well, that's crappy, or whatever later. Or you can listen to the tape that I have of he and I and go, God damn, he wrote so many brilliant things, even on this tape that we haven't even explored yet. You know?
What do you call that noise?
I'm just curious, what are your personal favorite power pop bands?
To me, the like I said, there are bands that are not always power pop, but obviously when the Records were one of my first favorite bands. They did like Tina Rama and Starry Eyes, and I also liked Bram Tchaikovsky. I liked the Raspberries, but I can't stand the guy now. But Badfinger's Baby Blue was one of the first songs, and also No Matter What was one of the first songs that I loved. And also Cheap Trick when they're threading their Beatle thread through their Midwestern rock thread, they become to me one of the greatest power pop bands with songs like Surrender. So I mean, there's more, but I feel like I'm hogging the mic. So
you've edited the books. You're allowed to mention every band that's in them.
It's funny you said that about Fountains of Wayne and how they didn't want to be defined as power pop, but I have to say, in the last, from the time from when Radiation Vibe came out and beyond, for me, that they really were in my top power pop bands, and when Utopia Parkway came out, I was blown away. I was like, this is what I want to do, and we were fortunate to be able to work with Adam, but that album just blew me away. So they actually, to go later in the, the decades of power pop, I would say Fountains of Wayne ended up being one of my favorites, if not my favorite.
Me too. And Adam just like had a knack for, no pun intended, but he had a knack for power pop, and so sad about Adam, man. It's just like,
it was a punch in the gut, wasn't it? It really brought it home for me. Like, he was the first guy I knew that died from it.
Yeah, and he was the first, and then weeks later, Hal Wildner died, who I also knew, who was a musical sort of producer, curator, and I knew him through my brother, who was on SNL with him. So both of those guys were going to be on my podcast. We'd been emailing. And then, a month or so before they got sick. So I didn't really follow through, and, I couldn't because they got sick. So,
hey, John Holbrook produced that or engineered that underneath the record with Adam. So I got the opportunity to work with John.
Oh,
and
cool.
then he produced my first solo record. He was a gem. I mean, he's a gem. He's still alive. He's a gem. The guy is amazing. But to work with him was a pleasure as well. Talk about a guy that's, gracious. And
John Holbrook did a lot of work at Utopia Sound and various Bearsville type places as well, right? Yeah.
Can you believe I had the opportunity to go to Bearsville to work with him, and I said, no, you got to come to Grand Rapids, John. I made him come all the way to Grand Rapids with his gear.
There's something to be said for that, though. I mean, it's funny because, Matthew Sweet moved back to Nebraska. And Matthew Sweet's another great power pop star,
Agreed.
by the way.
Agreed.
I would say Girlfriend is one of the great power pop songs.
Yep.
And Sick of Myself. Sick of Myself, I played that in a, one of those things where you get up to play people's songs. And it wasn't a Matthew Sweet night, but it was like, pick your favorite cover to do. And it's such an easy song to play, but it's, and Big Star's September Girls is another one. So
I haven't answered my bit yet. And I'm just thinking, I would say it's actually in my head. And it's interesting having this conversation to work out what power pop actually is. But in my head, it's not one band in particular, but it's just a sort of moment around, I guess, 1979, 1980, when in the UK charts, you would have the Jam were number one every 5 minutes, it seemed, with hit after hit after hit. I've mentioned Blondie already. Squeeze covered in your book. All of these people who are marrying a sort of tough guitarish sound with a pop sensibility, and so I wouldn't necessarily listen to their albums, but I could tell you all their singles.
But it's also, when I look at the power pop bands, I think to myself, are there really power pop? There are some, definitive power pop bands, but mostly for me, it's about power pop songs. It's about a song that comes out that you hear over the band, and even Badfinger, we consider to be a great power pop band. There were songs that weren't power pop on that, you know what I mean? So I like to think of it as a genre of song.
Well, the Beatles did She Said, which to me is a power pop song.
Right, agreed.
But the Beatles aren't all power pop, and the Who did, Kids Are All Right is a power pop song to me.
Yep.
But I don't know if you would say that Won't Get Fooled Again is a power pop song.
Right, exactly. Well, there's so many XTC songs that weren't power pop songs,
Yeah,
including
absolutely.
Love and a Farm Boy's Wages,
But then there's Are You Receiving Me, Radios in Motion,
Right.
and Atom Age, even like
Mm-hmm.
like those are power pop songs to me in the same way that Buzzcocks, Buzzcocks could be power pop as
Right.
well.
And I've just remembered the undertones as well has just come into my head.
Yes.
What's your answer to the question, Melanie?
Oh, you've mentioned so many of the ones that I absolutely adore. I'll throw in Utopia, The Cars, Weezer. I mean, depending on the time frame. The Knack. I was a huge Knack fan. Still am. You mentioned the Jam, Bram Tchaikovsky. All of those, just love them.
The
Cheap
Motors,
Trick.
the Motors are in that group, right? Like Bram Tchaikovsky and the Motors seem to be together.
I'm not familiar with the
Oh,
Motors.
you should check them out. Yeah,
Definitely.
They did Dancing the Night Away. Cheap Trick covered it later. But,
Okay, cool.
yeah.
Cool.
I do like the definition that you've come up with, though, Paul, at the start. It's just pretty much it can be anything you want it to be.
Well, actually, I wasn't going to read the whole thing, but there's a paragraph that I have in the introduction that says, for me, explaining the meaning of power pop is a little like explaining what love is. You know it when you feel it, but damn if it's not different for everyone who experiences it. And then I go on. There's a much longer part, but
Nice.
So, Paul, the book is called Go Further, More Literary Appreciations of Power Pop. Where can people get it and when's it available?
This book, Go Further, is available in May from Rarebird Press or Rarebird Books. I'm not sure. And I think you can order it now if you go to the Rarebird website or go to your Amazon. But also ask your indie booksellers. Ask indie booksellers because we like to keep them going, especially at this time. So
Yeah. And Brian, at this time it has been a tough time in lockdown for many people, but for artists in particular, if you're used to getting out and playing on the road, all the rest of it, if for musicians and not just musicians but technicians and everybody who keeps the show on the road, has it been a creative time for you?
Absolutely. This was the universe's way of telling me to sit down and write and work, and I write every day. And we've got 2 new albums coming out that are COVID inspired. So it's like this was the perfect time. And again, that's the way universe works for me. You just have to listen and go, okay, well, this is the time to roll up your sleeves. And sure, I got to dip into my IRA a little bit, but I'm gonna make some music. So it's been a very creative time.
And
Awesome.
any release dates?
We have a new album that should be coming out. I'm very hopeful. We put out singles. We'll put out a single a month on our own on social media, and then we'll put the album out after 6 months. So I'm going to say the new album will be out in June, but look for singles here within the next 60 days.
Remember where you heard it first. Paul, Brian, Melanie, thank you very, very much. It's been great talking to you.
What a pleasure.
I had a great time.
Thank you so much.
It was great.
What do you call that noise? Why do you call that noise?
To order Go Further, More Literary Appreciations of Power Pop by Paul Myers and S.W. Loudon, go to rarebirdlit.com, rarebirdlit.com. You can get up to date with Brian Vander Ark at brianvanderark.com. And if you click on the streaming tab, you can hear Brian's cover of The Mayor of Simpleton on Planet Sunday Sessions Volume 2. You can find my XTC books and t-shirts at xtclimelight.com. Thanks again to Brian, Paul, and Melanie, and to Julie Matthews for her drink recommendation. For making the podcast possible, thank you to all the supporters on Patreon, including the following Knights in Shining Karma: Terry Arnott, Dan Barrow, Matt Bell, Kevin Burt, Liam Duggan, Jamie Dunn, Helen Fay, Leslie Gooch, Robert Graham, Jesper Kumberg, Robert Lawlaw, Dennis LeCourrier, Liz Lynch, Amy Parkinson, Murray Meikle, Yusuf Murrah, Kevin Murray, Karen Neal, James Newell, Mark Reed, James Reimer, Simon Slatome, Michael Sutcliffe, Mark Thomas, Nigel Waller, and William Wilkstrom. If you'd like to support the XTC podcast, and why wouldn't you? You can do so at patreon.com/Mark Fisher. I'll see you again next time. Thanks for listening.
What
do you call that noise?
Head to xtclimelight.com where you can buy my 2 XTC books. First, there's the XTC Bumper Book of Fun for Boys and Girls, which is an anthology of Limelight, the XTC fanzine I made from 1982 to 1992.
We had a couple of lifelines to the world, and Limelight was one of them.
So the book is the XTC Bumper Book of Fun for Boys and Girls. It's stunning.
Thank you, Ian Lee. And then there's What Do You Call That Noise, an XTC discovery book, where you'll find more from the band, plus commentary from musicians including Anton Barbeau.
For me, it's just simply a life-changing song.
Anne McHugh.
It's like a painting by Van Gogh.
Jason Faulkner.
XTC probably made the most impact on me of any band that I can think of.
Chris Butler.
If there's anything more classic XTC, this is it.
And Rick Buckler.
It was well produced as well. It had the support of a great producer. I mean, it really sounded strong.
Order your copies of both books at xtclimelight.com.
It's a paper and ink net, the internet with added staples.